And so the parallel I can make to research is that it made me much more impatient or like eager to use the time wisely, right? So making sure that time doesn't get lost or working on the wrong thing. So really just focusing efforts on what I believe to be worthwhile and aligned with the mission that I gave myself to help immune cells to find and kill cancer cells in the body.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. During the pandemic, cancer researcher Jean Hausser realized how fleeting life was and how limited our time on Earth actually is. Jean decided to do something epic. He decided he was going to sail to Antarctica to go ski touring. And he's on the show today to share this journey. Hi, Jean. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
This is such an epic trip. I'm excited to dig in and learn more about it. Maybe before we start talking about it, though, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the outdoors? You know, what age did you fall in love with it? And kind of like why you like going?
Yeah, so I grew up in this border region between France and Germany called Alsace. And so, there's a few hills around there where my grandparents used to take me hiking. And then growing up, I went to a bit higher mountains like the Alps to go on hiking trips. But really for me, the turning point was moving to Switzerland when I started my PhD there, because it turned out that the university had a professional mountain guide on the payroll in the sports center. And so the guy was offering trainings and in mountaineering and in skiing and snowboarding. So I joined that, and this is where I really fell in love with the whole mountaineering side of the outdoors.
Wow, that's incredible, having a mountain guide on payroll at university. It's a very Swiss thing to do, isn't it?
Very bad.
So I'm interested, this ski trip, sailing and then skiing in Antarctica, like, how did you conceive of this project? I know it kind of hit you. You had to do something epic during COVID, but why Antarctica and why go skiing there?
Yeah, so this has been a long time coming, right? So I remember when I was a kid, I was watching these documentaries, in the evening with my parents, and there was this Shackleton expedition came up, and that made a strong impression on me. So it's been on my mind since a teenager, but I never thought about going there actually. But what then happened is that one trip took me to the southern shores of Patagonia. South America, and which is the last bit of Earth between Antarctica, and then I saw ships leaving to Antarctica. And in those days, I didn't have the time or the money, but then the idea became more concrete. And the next step was to take a trip to Oslo, where I visited the Fram Museum, which this is the ship that Amundsen took to the South Pole. And so that's spent half a day there, just being completely immersed. And when I left, I bought the book that Amundsen wrote to tell the expedition, and I felt like I was on board with the whole team. So from that point on, I was really driven to make that trip. But then really the trigger came during the COVID, because I happened to move to Sweden just a couple of months before the pandemic started. So I was on my own, in a small apartment in the suburbs of Stockholm, facing a prison as a view. And, people that were seemingly in good health were dying left and right. And the rules were changing every week. So we never really know when would you be able to take your next trip. Norway closed down. I was looking to go to Norway. It wasn't possible anymore. I went to go to the Alps. It wasn't possible anymore. So then I just thought, what do I really want to happen in my life? And the idea of the trip came up again. And so that's when I decided to make it happen.
You're a cancer researcher as well. And I wonder, do you see any parallels between how COVID impacted you and kind of changed your life and, just dealing with cancer and seeing the impacts of cancer, all the time? How does that kind of impact your approach to living your life?
Yeah, I mean, there are some parallels there that I do feel that, look, it gives a clear sense that life is finite, right? So I think it's important to ask ourselves, what is it that we want to live before life ends? And so the parallel I can make to research is that it made me much more impatient or like eager to use the time wisely, right? So that is, like carrying out research projects is it's a challenging endeavor, and it takes multiple years to figure out how nature works in certain aspects of cells, I'm trying to figure out how to get immune cells to find and kill cancer cells, right? And figuring out those aspects, it's a several year process of trial and errors to understand the new aspects of that. And so it means you only have a finite number of iterations you can go through your life before your time runs out as a scientist. So it made me much more conscious about using that time wisely and making sure that time doesn't get lost or working on the wrong thing. So really just focusing efforts on what I believe to be worthwhile and aligned with the mission that I gave myself to help immune cells to find and kill cancer cells in the body.
So you decided to sail from the tip of Patagonia down to Antarctica and then go ski touring up and down the glaciers. What was your experience in these two activities before you started this trip?
So when it comes to ski touring, I did have I went through a ladder of experiences to prepare for that, right? So I did have a quite a number of experiences, which I'd love to tell you about more a bit later. But what the interesting part is the sailing, that I was quite novice to that side of the experience. Like the main experience I had was to a 10-day sailing trip to the French Caribbean that I did 15 years before with friends. So I can imagine that sailing to Antarctica was a bit of a different experience.
And so you did this trip as part of a group. Who was in the group with you?
As part of the group, there was it was an interesting group of people. So first of all, there were like 7 members of the expedition, which were the people that were financing the whole thing, right? So there was a couple from Austria that, she is a nurse working in a helicopter, and he works in a field of activity where he puts himself at physical risk to in the service of others. When they're not doing that, they're volunteering as mountain rescuers in the Alps and base jumping. This kind of people, very team-minded, calm, enjoyable people. There was a couple from Switzerland in their 60s, which she had been skiing her whole life, and she was like managing a hospital, and he was a veterinarian and a politician in Switzerland. And there was also an intensive care nurse from Zurich, and there was a young professional, maybe in his 30s, working in the financial industry in Switzerland. And in addition to that, there was 5 professionals. So there were 2 Swiss mountain guys. One of them was the leader of the expedition, so the organizer. And on top of them, we also had a skipper, like a Frenchman at the end of his 40s, who had the experience of sailing around the world in an 8-meter boat. And we had 2 professional sailors to help him out, which normally are themselves professional skippers working between Greenland, Iceland, and Arctic Norway.
And then how did you join this? Is this something you just found online and joined, or did someone seek you out?
Yeah, so what happened is that this was like back in 2013. So I was living in Switzerland, about to relocate to the Middle East for professional reasons. And at that time, I saw an email from a mountain guide that I had been on the trip on while learning how to do mountaineering in Switzerland. He had this mailing list, right? And at the end of the mailing list, it said ski tour Antarctica. And so that was back in 2013. And then, it just struck me as a beautiful thing to do at some time in the future. And so during this episode of being stuck in my room during COVID, that thought popped in my mind again.
So the sailing part for me is super intriguing because that's known as one of the worst oceans in the world. They call it the Roaring Forties because of the waves. The Drake Passage is tough for people that cruise down there on large boats. What was it like sailing through, what can be one of the most, dangerous seas on Earth?
So I must say that I wasn't too confident about doing that, given my sailing experience, right? So obviously you have to note that there were like 3 professionals along to take care of that part of the trip. But what it felt like is, well, first of all, when we set sail from South America, on the first day at sea, like half of the team was seasick and in bed, right? And so puking, and so the atmosphere changed quite rapidly as soon as we went into the sea. And the thing is, one has to realize that this is a sea where you commonly get waves, or in a storm you can be 10-meter waves and winds over 100 kilometers per hour, right? So, and this was a 20-meter sailboat, so relative to 10-meter waves, it's pretty big waves that you could experience. So I was quite, I had some apprehension around that. Now it turns out that you can actually, as a skipper, it's the responsibility of the skipper to try to manage the weather, right? And in principle, you can do that by timing the time that you leave South America, so as to avoid the weather. But you can only do this in limited measure because the boat is moving maybe at 15 kilometers per hour, but the weather systems, they move 3 times as fast. So you can kind of know what's going to happen for the first half of the traverse, which is like 1 week in total. So for the first half, you know kind of what to expect, but for the second half, you have to be lucky. And it turns out that on that trip, we were lucky. So the experience of itself was beautiful because like you get to sit and like you do watches, right? So but the way that the traverse works is you spend 2 hours on the bridge, in the waves and in the wind in your sailing clothes, and then you have 6 hours to eat or and to rest, and then repeat again. You're on deck again, so you repeat this the whole day, and when you're resting, then some crew members take over for you. And so what happens is, I love doing this watch, for example, from midnight to 2 in the morning. So that was mine. And it was beautiful being on deck there with the waves, nothing happening. Like you can't use a phone, you can't use a book. You're just sitting there looking at the world. And then there's nothing for hundreds of miles, just the sea. It's just you and the wind in the sails and the sound of the waves crashing on the boat and sometimes coming over your head. So, and with the rest of the passengers like sleeping inside the boat, like you feel really entrusted to be watching over everybody in this moment. At some point the captain came out and he put Pink Floyd, and we're just like sitting in silence and in awe, looking at the ocean at night. I loved going back to my bunk and just listening to the sound of this whole ship like cracking in the waves and being in the middle of the Southern Ocean. So it was to me, it's one of the most beautiful things I think I've had the chance to experience in my life.
Now, I'm also interested in being with some strangers in a kind of tight, confined space. I know when I've talked to people that have done big sail journeys, they say the hardest part is actually just, being around so many other people in tight, confined spaces. What was it like for you spending this week on on the ocean with people you didn't know that well?
It was better than I thought. It's something I was kind of scared about that, right? Because I was scared about the point that when you're on a 20 meters boat and you basically have 2 square meters to share with one person, right? This is the space you have for yourself. So what happens there? You can't run away, right? If you are angry at someone or if you have like a problem with someone, there's no running away. You just have to make it work because you have to work together for all safety maneuvers. When going traveling on glaciers, when getting off the boat, when you have to work together, you can't be distracted by thoughts of anger or of resentment. So I wonder how I would be able to navigate this because I think of myself as a friendly guy, but I also have my temper. So and the way I navigated that was by just trying to be vulnerable and emotionally honest, in the sense of like there's twice I got angry at the expedition leader actually. And so what I did is to basically tell him that he said this specific thing, and then that made me angry. And then I had a one sentence about the story of why I got angry about this, and I was afraid that maybe I would now be an outcast, right? He would just like kind of put me on the side, maybe ask me to stay on boat or something. And but what it did is it resolved the issue, right? So it's I felt very relieved after doing that, um, and so it allowed the whole functioning to continue seamlessly. So there was a strong experience of practicing emotional honesty in the context of a close group like this.
What was it like the first glimpse of Antarctica? People going on a cruise ship, they love it, but just feel like on a sailboat, that would have just been extra special. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it certainly was. So you arrive progressively, right? So as you get closer, you're sailing and it's very foggy, and then perhaps in the middle of the night, the fog through the fog it breaks a little bit, and then you glimpse like white spots, which is the glaciers that are covering the islands that are around the Antarctic Peninsula. And then you keep sailing, and as you get closer, slowly the fog kind of breaks, and then you see basically this big barrier of ice, perhaps in places it can be several hundred meters high, that drop into the ocean. And and then you're basically just there and staring at that and thinking, wow, we are there, right? I mean, you've seen this place on the map for so long, and now you're actually there, like physically, and this is it. And now you actually get to leave the boat and go on the Zodiac, put your skis on, and actually go explore that with your own feet. I mean, that it was a wonderful thing.
Now, getting there was just part of the journey. Once you're there, how many days did you spend ski touring?
It was like a 5-week trip in total, right? So that takes you a week to get there by boat and a week to come back. And so we had around 20 days for the skiing. And around those, around a bit more than half, we had good enough weather to actually go on land. Because if it's extremely foggy, you don't want to be on land, right? Because then the fog might prevent you from seeing crevasses, and you don't want to fall into crevasses in the middle of nowhere. It's not a good idea, even if you're close to civilization, but it's even a worse idea if you're in Antarctica. Or if it's extremely windy, which is often the case there, then it's really hard to keep your balance while skiing, right? So there was a number of days where we either took little walks or we stayed on the boat.
Now, I remember, you talked a little bit about Roald Amundsen and Ernest Shackleton and their journeys across Antarctica. I've read both their books. I've watched videos or movies at the Banff Mountain Film Festival. And my impression is the skiing in Antarctica is pretty tough. Like it's not, this epic blower powder. But I've never met anyone who went there just to ski. Everyone's there doing a traverse or doing something else. Can you share a bit about what the conditions were like for people that like, skiing,
Yeah.
powder snow? Can you get that in Antarctica?
So when I was there, we didn't have that much powder. Usually, what we had was, and this is going to be very technical now, but what you usually had was a strong layer of hard snow, and on top of it, the latest snow would drop on, right? And so it would give you a nice cushion of fresh snow over a hard layer, and that was really pleasurable to ski because you had like solid support, but also like the comfort of the fresh snow. So that for this reason, I really enjoyed most of the skiing that we did there. But what I want to say is that I probably wouldn't go there for the sake of finding great snow, because like I think you can probably find a better snow to distance ratio in other places, right? Because it's really far to go there. So you would want the snow to be amazing in quality to justify this. But the main reason to go there was mainly the landscape and the human experience, right? Because like just watching over those gigantic masses of ice and of rocks, and the sea coming in the middle, and having this wildlife there. So that was for me the essence of the skiing. It was more like what you see is not so much how the snow felt, I would say.
And then how much distance did you cover on the Antarctic coast? Did you kind of stick in one region or would you sail, 20 kilometers one day and next day maybe sail 50 kilometers to explore different parts of Antarctica?
Yeah, that was pretty much the idea, right? So we would anchor in different places, and there was some tactic, right? So there were some summits that we knew we wanted to do, because the expedition leader had surveyed in advance which kind of summits would be appropriate to do in the context of a new group like this. And then depending on whether we would go to one or to the other, or depending on distance, right? So it was usually anchoring in some place, going offshore, maybe doing one summit, maybe another, then moving a bit along the coast. And we covered probably around like maybe 200 kilometers of coastline over the expedition.
Now, I was watching some of your Instagram videos and there was one that really hit me. Um, you were on like a 40-degree slope, so a really steep slope. And, usually when you're skiing that in the mountains, you look down and okay, if you fall, eventually it levels out. In your case, it just went down into the ocean and there were rocks down there and there's just a little Zodiac dinghy to help you. And, I was just thinking if anything went wrong there, that is a huge, huge consequences because even like how do you get warmed up? Okay, you get back to your sailboat. I assume there's heating there, but it's it can really go wrong. And I was wondering, like, was that a common kind of occurrence that you'd have these like really high consequence situations, or is that kind of a one off?
No, so probably the time when we got off the boat and had to start with a steep slope just to begin the day program, that wasn't common, right? It was a bit of a special day, and I want to say that the our two guys that had made a risk assessment to decide if we should do that, and it felt that the snow was stable enough at that location to let us go. And so there was I wouldn't say that that was the typical way that we did this, because the way that we did it was to actually manage risk, right? So there's so many risks over there, like there's the avalanche risk, there's you can fall into a crevasse, and they're huge out there. There's the risk of sliding on a steep slope, and maybe you end up on a cliff and dropping into the ocean. There's the risk of the weather, getting lost. I mean, there's a number of risks there, and so, and also the risk of injury, right? Because you don't want to get injured. Like, if you get something like a bone fracture, it's not super fun if you're in the Rockies or on a ski resort. But it sucks if you're in Antarctica, because maybe you get the compartment syndrome, and it's there's like civilization is 1,000 kilometers away, right? So it's not clear that you can get to a hospital very rapidly to take care of it. So what you actually want to do is you want to go touring in a way that manages risk, right? So that meant, instead of doing tours that are like 8 or 9 hours long, maybe we're more like 6 hours. Instead of going on super steep slopes, you go something that's more measured. Instead of skiing as fast and as cool and elegantly as you possibly can, you would go a bit slower and favor safety over style, right? So a number of strategies were to put in place, including roping to each other at times where the visibility was poor, so that we would de-risk the crevasses.
What would you do? You mentioned you had about half the days the weather didn't cooperate. Would you just sit on the boat and play cards, or were there other things you could do that didn't involve skiing?
So there's a few things we could do. So one, you can cook, right? So that's I mean, actually there were the skipper and one of the pro sailor were French, so we were quite blessed with, and the other sailor was Spanish, so we had quite serious food over there, and we just help out with the kitchen. Another thing that you could do is just go on deck and put your warm clothes and just enjoy the size of the snow, like just whizzing by horizontally in the wind, just enjoying that, seeing the motifs that the wind draws in over the water, seeing the penguins playing around the boat. Like, it's another thing you can do. You can have a conversation with people, right? Because this is a time where nobody has a cell phone, right? So we are all very much in connection with each other. And for myself, about half of the trip, I actually noticed that I was itching to do something intellectual again, right? Not just talking or watching. So I bought with me. I had this textbook in this branch of statistics called causal inference, and I had the time to work through it. So yeah, it was, and it felt. Yeah, it felt like a good time to be able to find enough quiet time to actually work through a statistics textbook.
One thing people to Antarctica talk about is the wildlife they see, and that it's,
Mhm.
they see things they never see up in, around Europe or North America. You mentioned penguins. Was there other wildlife you got to see while sailing?
Yeah, so my favorite one were whales, which have this slowness and this gigantism to them that I didn't anticipate. I mean, I had seen waves on TV, right? But that was different. I mean, there was a time actually where we took the kayak out on the water, and then we saw that there was a group of whales far away. So there was like two kayaks with two people each, and then we had the Zodiac for safety that was coming along with us, and we got closer to the whales. And I don't know what I was expecting, but at some point we realized that we were on top of them, right? So, and then we realized that there were actually a group of them. It was like 5 or 6 whales, um, and one would basically like come out, just out of the water right in front of us, and he was going so slowly, maybe a meter away. He was going very slowly, and it felt like watching a freight train passing by, like at a very slow speed. You could see the shells growing on its back, and it's black and it's wet, and it has the size of a dinosaur, right? You feel like you're back in prehistoric times. Um, and then just blowing the whatever water hole it has on its back, like in very loud and deep sound. And then another one doing the same on the back. It's like, what's going on up there? And all of a sudden we realize, oh, there's one right below us. And at this point, the sailor that were with us on the Zodiac was like, okay, everybody stay calm. The problem is just that it's very big. So if it comes out and you capsize, stay calm. I come and I find you. And so, And what was interesting about this part is that there wasn't that much fear, just much more excitement in this moment of being in the middle of this prehistorically sized gigantic animals. And at the end of it, one whale just came out, with peeking like this out of the water, and we could see his eye, and it felt like he was looking at us, like as a premise to diving deep and living again. So that was a big memory I take back from this trip.
You mentioned earlier people's phones didn't work on board, but was there any connectivity with the outside world, or were you, was it like going back in time 30 years when people just had to talk and they couldn't be on any sort of technology?
So the skipper did have internet, right, for professional purposes, but we didn't have access to that. So what we had access to is, every perhaps once a week we could maybe send one or two lines to friends and family, just to give a sign of life that everything is good, like. That did quite a bit, actually, right? Because one thing that happens is that you only communicate by voice and with eye contact and with nonverbal cues, which feels very natural, and that feels very connecting to others, as opposed to going for screens, right, which is very artificial. So it feels very connecting to the rest of the team. And I mean, another thing that it did is that you're not constantly bombarding with bad news over which you have no control, right? So you on this boat, like, everything that you do is actually under your control. Like, and everything you do, why you do it. There's a meaning to it, right? If you cook because you need to eat, and then you clean because you have to be ready for the next day, and then you help putting the Zodiac in and out because you want to go ski touring, and then you rope up because it's for everybody's safety. Everything has purpose, and you directly relate to that purpose. There's no distance, no abstraction. Since you have no phone, you don't get the comparison with the whole world, right? So, you're on this boat, and maybe one person knows how to sing, but if you're in the actual world, what happens is you get social media, and then you compete here with Beyonce or with Pavarotti, right? But on the boat, your purpose and what you bring to the group is in relation to 12 other people, a small group, and so everybody has basically naturally a large contribution, like something that makes a difference. And so this whole thing felt very, very connecting to both to others and to oneself.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's so true. And that we always measure ourselves against these people who are famous or fantastic at their skill. But yeah, in a group of friends or a family, if you're the best singer, you might be terrible compared to, someone that's accomplished, but you're still the best singer. So everyone's going to get you to sing and enjoy it and appreciate it. It's a really interesting take. When you came back, did you just fall back into the technology habits that are so pervasive now, or has there been an impact on how you use technology now?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. So first of all, coming back felt horrible in comparison to this, right? Because it's you open your email, and then all of a sudden there's all these things you have to do, like confirm check-in, and then tell some landlord what time you're supposed to arrive, and, like, two-factor authentication, and, like, all of a sudden the time the afternoon runs away. You look outside, it's dark, and all you've done is, clicking forms on the computer the whole afternoon, right? So it felt terrible. I mean, I'm smiling about it, but it felt terrible because, and the thing is, you only see it, I think, if you step out of the world, right? You only see the world if you step out of it. So coming back didn't feel so great. And what it did for me is that it really invited me to pay very strong attention to actually, who do I give control over my time, and who do I give a chance to reach me, and who not. And um, so I became very, very, I mean, knowing how life can feel like, I know when I miss it, right? So I know when something's off in my life, because I miss this feeling of connection to others and to myself that I had over there. And I did fall back into old habits at time, right? So, I mean, just last week, I spent a couple of nights from between 10 a.m. and 2, I mean, between 10 and 2 in the morning on Instagram, like it. So, but now I realize it, and I install solutions so I don't get addicted to this again, right? So, but it's a constant battle, and it's a revealer of how much technology has taken control over our attention. And
What's your solution to try and limit your technology use?
can I mention brands, or is that
Yeah, definitely.
yeah? One thing that really helped me was installing the Freedom app. So shout out to you guys, Freedom. Yeah, what it does is it lets you lock yourself out of whatever you don't want to be, um, whatever you don't want to have access to, and it's hard enough to remove it that you actually can comply. So this is I just paid for the lifelong subscription last month, and it's I'm not going to look back. This has been great.
Yeah, it's funny. I walk to pick up one of my sons at school every day, and I just see, all the parents in their cars, and typically every single one is just staring down at their phone. And you go to the shopping center and you see, you know, a third of the people are walking around staring down at their phone, and it just seems like something's off with our use of phones. But I'm the same way. Like after a full day of work, sometimes I just like to sit down and watch stupid, well, I think they're very good YouTube videos, but I watch dudes building cabins or sailing the world or, biking around the world or stupid stuff like that. And I realize I just spent an hour watching stuff that's, mildly interesting, but it's just so addictive. So I'm going to check out that Freedom app. Cause yeah, I'd love to have something to help keep me from being on my phone so darn much. You then sailed back. What was the feeling like sailing back? Was it a easy, you can kind of control the passage out, but could you control the weather on the passage back as much, or did you have to deal with more weather, or was it a straightforward sail back to South America?
So it's the exact same consideration as on the way there, but there was a few striking things that happened on the way back. So once was that at one point I was on my watch, and then what happened is that the sailor that was on watch with us inside the cabin just opened the hatch and shouted, "Jean, the autopilot just broke down. Run to the helm, fast, fast!" And so I get up and I try to run to the helm as fast as I possibly can, which is it's tricky because you wear this harness, the boat is moving, and you're tethered to a line, right, that runs all along the boat because you want. If you go overboard, it's a catastrophe. It's not sure that you can survive that. So you're tied, you're tethered to the boat, and so not very elegant running towards the helm. But I got there and I shouted to him, so okay, which cap, right? And he shouted me some number, and then I'm like, that seems a little far, but so I started to steer toward that. And I was doing that. I started to see that the main sail was losing um, pressure, right? And that's not good because that happens. The boat is gonna stall, and then it's a mess to get it started again. Because if you don't have speed, you can't steer, and so you don't want the boat to stop. It's a whole process to get it started again. So and if you go the wrong way, you can also do you can do this thing where the wind is going to change side of the wall compared to the sail, and then this going to cause the sail to come rushing across the bridge, and then maybe can be damaged because of the power that's in the ropes when this happens. So then he told me, okay, what are you doing? Go this other way, and then asking for the number again, and then the first time around he told me something like um yeah, it's just like something went wrong with the French numbers, like in this Spanish person, and then the numbers we got wrong, and so or a big time also was just as we were approaching the land again. You see it coming on the GPS, but at some point, I we really want to see Cape Horn, right? Because Cape Horn has this mythical aura, right? About for hundreds of years, it's been this feared place at the southern tip of America, and maybe can I see Cape Horn in my life at one time? And the captain at some point he was at the helm, and he calmly said, as I was on deck, he said, "Okay, we can see Cape Horn on the front." And then I look, and I couldn't really see anything. But then looking better, all of a sudden, I saw it like again. The fog has this habit of breaking, and then you see this shadow in the far, with the spike on top, and a desolated shadow out in the fog, and that was Cape Horn. And shortly after that, I don't know if there was a coincidence, but then we had a fire that break out, like a generator caught fire. And so, there's like heavy smoke coming out of the boat. And then it wasn't very clear what would be the consequence of this, but the crew, being the professionals that they handled it very with a lot of skill. And so that came out all right. But yeah, so there was a few interesting events on the way back as well. Yeah.
And so with all this risk, you just mentioned a few of the things just on the trip back, all the risks of skiing in Antarctica and being so far away from any help. Like this is not just, travel insurance you can buy online for, you get included with your credit card.
Yeah.
How do you find insurance to, protect you if you do need an evac from Antarctica or, an evac while at
Well,
sea?
Richard, this has been this has been an adventure in itself, actually, because I started off with my home insurance, right? Because it includes travel insurance. And so I asked them if they would cover me, and then extend an email, and they said yes. And I'm like, that was a bit too easy, right? So I told them, look, if some rescue has to come, it comes from 1,000 kilometers away on the Southern Sea, and there's these 10-meter waves and 100 kilometers per hour winds, and it may cost $100,000 probably. Are you covering that? And then they said, no. So then then I read, okay, who can I reach to? So I looked towards the Alpine clubs, right? Because they do usually have worldwide evac insurance. But the thing is that would exclude polar regions. So it didn't work. And so at some point I found another insurance, like American company that does global rescue. I mean, that's actually their name. But it turns out it stops at the 60th south and north parallel, which goes right in between South America and Antarctica. So I reason maybe that's good enough, but the expedition leader wouldn't let me do that. And so he said, okay, try to find another solution. How about this German company that insures big ships? So I phoned them, and they told me, well, we don't do that. You need to go for a broker. So I called a broker in Germany. I tried to explain him on the phone in German that I need this insurance. And he's like, to do what? It's like, that sounds exciting. And they never got back to me. I tried another time, same thing. So then I reached out to the skipper, which was tricky to reach because he lives on the farm in a remote area in Uruguay. So I never managed to reach him actually before the trip. So that didn't work. In the end, I reached out to my sailing instructors who told me that their instructor there was a former Swedish Olympic champion who knew a Norwegian skipper that works in the Arctic. So I reached out to her, and she told me to reach out to her boss, whose name was Knut, who manages the company. And Knut told me to talk to the skipper to put a rider on the boat. So I was back to square one, right? Because I couldn't reach a skipper. So in the end, what happened is I went to a wedding. Because my beloved has a lot of friends here in Stockholm. And so I was invited to the wedding. We're chit-chatting. And so the Antarctica trip comes up. And I told him, yeah, I'm stuck with this insurance thing. And I was talking to this guy, and he was working in risk management for big companies. And he says, maybe I can ask my manager. And so the manager got in touch with me, and she recommended me a Swedish company, which happened to cover this risk. Which I couldn't believe I could have found insurance right home, because I forgot to say, I also called to Australia, and I did a worldwide survey of sailors insurance, and nothing would work. And in the end, it was like the wedding random, conversation over canapé and champagne that got me the insurance.
And how much is insurance for a 5-week sailing and skiing trip in Antarctica?
It was less than $1,000 actually.
Oh, wow.
I
That's
think
really
it was
cheap.
something $700 or $800. Yeah.
Wow. That's actually super cheap. I thought it could have been like several $1,000s easily.
Yeah, no, it was in the 1,000 ballpark. Yeah.
So, having done this whole trip, I was wondering, as you reflect back, do you think it's changed you in any ways? Are you a different person now than before you did this?
Yeah, I do feel so in several ways. So one way in which I do feel different is just knowing what it feels like to be in touch with my core, right? So when there's no external disruption in terms of making me do things where I marginally see the point, but you have to do it because you live in a country that has rules and your profession has rules, and you don't really know why you do it, but it's just the way you have to do it, and then you do it. So this doesn't happen there. And then just living in the context of a small group where everything you do has purpose that you see that benefits the group and benefits you, it just feels like you touch your core, like you're yourself, like in the purest sense, right? And in disconnection from the news and from the phones, like so it changed me in that way. I would say just knowing what me feels like, and probably it also gave me a sense of like, it's interesting how the years coming up to the trip to Antarctica, I felt compelled to speak about it because I felt like it would give me like soothe some sense of unworthiness, like get me the respect of men and the love of women, these kind of things. But as soon as the trip was actually going to happen, like the year before and now, like I felt that I lost this sense of having to do this, right? So it's so it soothed going through this feeling of unworthiness that I had been carrying for years prior to the trip. So in these two ways, I felt that the trip was changing.
Jean, it's been great to hear about your story and this incredible expedition. Thanks for taking time to come on the show and talk about it.
It's been a pleasure, Richard. Thanks a lot.
If people want to learn more, I know you're active, or you have a little bit of stuff on social media, but where can they find you?
So you can find me on my websites. Perhaps the link will be on Richard's website. I mean, it's jean.hausser.org. And if you're curious about the expedition, there's also an upcoming book on the topic that I'm wrapping up right now.
And I would urge people to check out the YouTube of some of these ski days and time on the sailboat, because it is great. That's at Jean Hausser on Instagram. And with that, thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.